When you release an album on the internet, it's entering a sea of crap. 60,000 tracks get uploaded to Spotify every day, 20% of which never get played once. You could pour your heart into a record, work on it for months, get it mastered in a fancy studio. You could believe in it more than anything in the world, but it doesn't change the fact that you're a Pez dispenser in an ocean of garbage. Now, what if there was some kind of shortcut? A few $1,000s slipped under the table to get your song played on the radio or on some popular Spotify playlist. You've already gone this far. Why stop now? What you would be committing is payola, the practice of bribing someone to use their influence to promote a particular product or interest. It's different from an advertisement because nobody knows that money changed hands. The people who hear you on the radio think your song is there on its own merit. But sounds innocent enough, right?
$500,000 for payola over a 2-year period.
Many with mafia connections.
If he's a musician, they're threatening to break his playing hand.
You take this ounce and going home of cocaine.
If he's a vocalist, they're threatening to slit his throat.
Almost $80 million a year.
Well, he told me to keep my blankety-blank face out of his blankety-blank business, or else he would break my blankety-blank legs.
Payola has been a part of the American music industry from the very beginning. How much has varied over time, but many musicians, perhaps even whole genres of music, owe their popularity to the practice. In one way, it's as American as apple pie. Anyone with the song they truly believe in can put their money where their mouth is. On the other hand, it leads to morally questionable situations. For some reason, there is just something icky about the idea of our musical tastes being manipulated. We are not naive enough to think that the world is a fair place. But when we go to bed at night, we take comfort in the fact that Limp Bizkit or Shawn Mendes have earned their way to the top. Right? Right? Okay, I think we better dig into this. Payola dates as far back as the late 1800s, when publishers on Tin Pan Alley would bang upright pianos, competing to write the best hits. Of course, being decades before the invention of the phonograph, it wasn't records they were selling, it was sheet music. And those pieces of paper sold like crazy. For example, Charles K. Harris's song, After the Ball, sold a whopping 2 million copies in 1892 alone.
Break of morn.
Promoting sheet music with no radio and no record players was not easy. The only way people could hear your song was from a live performance. Thus, the best promotion was getting a popular singer to play your song. And what was the best way to convince them? A little cash. Take that smash hit song by Charles K. Harris. Well, a letter he wrote in 1893 to a Los Angeles theater shows exactly how this worked. On March 23rd to 25th, the Primrose and West Minstrel Company will play your theater. A young American tenor, Evan Williams, will sing my new song, After the Ball. I am enclosing my check for $10. If Mr. Williams sings it all 4 times, you are to give him the $10. If he sings it only 3 times, you are to deduct $2.50. In fact, deduct $2.50 for each omission and return the money to me. Mind you, this was not illegal. In fact, it was extremely common. But that doesn't mean everyone liked it. For one, theater managers were getting upset when, on a given night, 3 or 4 of their singers would want to perform the same song, having all just been paid off by the same publisher. In an even more egregious example, publishers would buy a block of 50 tickets at a major theater like the Palace in New York. The publisher's promotion staff would attend along with their family members. They would wait for the paid-off musician to sing their tune, then cheer wildly, giving the illusion that the song is a hit. Worse yet, another rival group of promoters might be elsewhere in the audience, and when their song is performed, you'd have one group cheering while the other jeers and boos. If the public didn't know what was going on before, they certainly did now. And sure enough, around this time, the word payola was coined. Some say it's a combination of pay and Victrola, but more likely it's because adding ola to the end of words was just a trendy thing to do. Nevertheless, as the public caught on, there was a growing sense that payola was bad for the music industry. Not just for the reasons above, but because it prevented good songs from reaching the public, while allowing bad ones to overstay their welcome. Thus, on the eve of World War I, the major publishers all banded together and agreed to stop. The end. Not really. They did agree to end the practice, but nobody really stopped. You see, the moment payola is banned is actually the best time to do it. It immediately puts you ahead of the competition, and you get more bang for your buck. For the next few decades, this cycle would continue. Payola is banned, then creeps back in, then becomes banned again. Publishers would find loopholes to avoid getting caught, like giving musicians a cut-in on the royalties, or as Irving Berlin's company did, creating a subsidiary to do the dirty work for you. And this was how things pretty much continued until the 1950s. In the spring of 1955, early Monday morning, a 29-year-old city boy from St. Louis stood outside the Chess Records office in Chicago, waiting for the man he was told could make his career. The kid was Chuck Berry, and he was determined to release his first record. The man he was looking for was 38-year-old Polish-Jewish businessman Leonard Chess, owner, along with his brother, of Chess Records, one of the few labels that released music from black artists. Leonard was so impressed by Chuck's confidence, he told him to return with demo recordings. And so he did. Berry assumed that if anything would get him a record deal, it would be one of his blues standards.
In the wee wee hours, that's when I think of you.
But Leonard was unfazed. Instead, what caught his ears was an upbeat reimagining of an old country western song, Ida Red. Chuck was surprised, to say the least. The black labels at this point in time only wanted soul, blues, and R&B, not hillbilly music. But the Chess brothers heard something. Different. Different from Bo Diddley, different from everybody, like nothing we'd heard before. Though it needed some changes. For one, a bass and tambourine to make the sound even bigger. Next, the lyrics. Make it about fast cars and young love, they recommended. And finally, the title. Ida Red was too country sounding, not to mention already taken as a song name. So somebody glanced at a box of mascara and went, how about Maybellene?
Why can't you be true? Oh, Maybellene, can't you be true? Just start back doing the things you used to do. Oh!
This was how, in many people's eyes, the first rock and roll hit was born. The importance of Maybellene cannot be understated. It started Chuck Berry's career, who in turn would be one of rock's single biggest influences.
If you had tried to try and give rock and roll another name, you might call it Chuck Berry.
But when Chuck finally got his hands on a copy of Maybellene, there was one thing that surprised him. Next to his name on the sleeve, there were two other names listed as songwriters. People who most definitely were not in St. Louis when the song was penned.
You know, who are these guys, you know? I knew Alan Freed. I heard him on the radio. He was a disc jockey in New York that played the record. Who is Russ Fredo? He owns a stenography store who supplied Leonard with his stationery.
While there is some disagreement as to whether Chuck Berry knew about the arrangement beforehand, there's no confusion over what this was. It was payola.
the same time.
When Maybellene was released in the summer of 1955, Alan Freed was one of the biggest disc jockeys in the country. Before moving to New York City, he was a DJ in Cleveland, where he is credited by many to have coined the phrase rock and roll in 1951. He played soul, R&B, and rock records when few stations allowed it.
I mean, what the hell are you playing that record for? That Tutti Frutti, it's on the list, it's #1 on the adult playlist.
He hosted some of the first mixed-race concerts in the country, and played a big role in popularizing Little Richard, the Moonglows, Bo Diddley, Bill Haley, Jerry Lee Lewis, and of course, Chuck Berry. On the one hand, Alan Freed's massive popularity allowed him to get away with murder. He normalized black artists on the radio when many other stations would only play cover versions by white bands. On the other hand, every rock and roll hopeful would soon be flooding his office, pleading for the spin that would make their career.
Now, there's no way to guarantee a hit. But if someone were able to determine what records were to be played and influence the likes and dislikes of the potential buyers, that person would be in a very powerful position in the industry.
In fact, as radio became the dominant way Americans discovered new music, hundreds of DJs around the country found themselves in a similar position of power. Naturally, the record labels did everything they could to exploit this. When they visited the stations to pitch their new releases, the promoters brought jewelry, watches, silk shirts, and expensive luggage. There would be lavish parties with female entertainment, fully paid vacations, TV sets delivered to the home, even a mortgage bill picked up by the record label. Others yet simply paid cash, weekly payments of maybe $100, guaranteeing a certain number of spins. Or, as in the case of Alan Freed and Chuck Berry, a DJ might be given partial songwriting credit, with the understanding that they'd now play the record more frequently. Scummy? Definitely. But it's important to remember that when rock and roll emerged, it was a bottom shelf genre. The major labels didn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. Instead, small-timers like Chess, Imperial, and Atlantic stepped up to the plate, and lacking the same resources as the majors, they needed a clever way to compete. Payola was that shortcut. Payola gave the Chess brothers a foot in the door to major radio markets. It gave Chuck Berry's Maybellene extensive airplay on one of the country's most popular shows. Of course, payola also meant privileging one record at the expense of others. As one anonymous record label owner revealed in 1959, 13 of the 20 DJs who controlled the Chicago market wouldn't even consider his releases without payment. $100 a week, said one, $200 a week, said another. One even required a 2% interest in his business. The idea that, on your ride home from work, you might be hearing Song A, not because it's truly the best song, but just because it paid more than Song B. Well, that did not sit right with the American public, and soon their anger would boil over.
If either of you want to stop the game, you must tell me so right now.
I'll stop.
Then you win $20,000.
In the late 50s, an investigation by the US Congress revealed widespread fixing of game shows by producers. The story was a sensation, and the politicians behind the probe, like Orrin Harris, became minor celebrities. Riding their wave of success, the Congressional Committee announced a new probe into another area of public intrigue: the alleged bribing of radio DJs. Unlike the payola scandals of the past, the government was now actually interested because it involved the federally regulated radio airwaves. Let's talk about this for a second. In order to receive a broadcast license, radio stations are required to follow all sorts of guidelines. One of those being that paid sponsorships must be mentioned on the air.
And now let me tell you about McTavish's Skinless Weenies.
In other words, if you paid a DJ $100 to hype your new drive-in movie theater, that DJ would need to disclose that you're a sponsor of their show. Otherwise, it's considered deceptive to the audience. The same goes for music. A radio station was technically allowed to accept payment in exchange for airplay, but they would need to say something like, "The following song is from our sponsor, Chess Records." Of course, few DJs, if any, actually did this, since they'd be admitting to their bosses that they took an under-the-table payment, and probably get fired. In the fall of 1959, the FCC announced that radio stations who engaged in payola could lose their broadcast license, even if the owners were unaware it was going on. This sent a chill through the industry, as station managers scrambled to collect affidavits from their employees.
All it is an affidavit stating that you never received money or gifts for playing any records. I can't sign that.
Those who refused or who admitted to payola were fired immediately. Detroit's Tom Clay, Philadelphia's Joe Niagara, Cleveland's Joseph Finnan. Many were subpoenaed, forced to reveal the extent of their misdeeds in front of Congress. Some 200 to 250 DJs were implicated, with dozens of them making $15,000 to $25,000 a year from payola alone.
And here we go to rockin'.
But nobody's downfall was more painful than Alan Freed's. Lon the underdog who fought for despised genres of music, Alan was finally breaking into the mainstream with his primetime ABC show, The Big Beat. When allegations surfaced that he had received bribes of at least $30,000, as well as suspicious songwriting credit for some 15 songs, Freed lost his radio and TV shows practically overnight. And what resulted from this unprecedented government probe? President Eisenhower signed the Communications Act amendments into law in 1960. It made payola a federal crime, punishable by up to a year in jail and a $10,000 fine. Many believed it would put an end to payola once and for all. Others believed it was the final nail in the coffin for rock and roll, a genre that couldn't have possibly broken the mainstream on its own merits, they would say. One op-ed predicted the return of Tin Pan Alley greats like Irving Berlin,
It's a lovely day today.
while another declared the smooth sounds of Paul Anka and Conway Twitty the future.
Tonight, we'd like to say special thanks. We don't have much time to thank everybody, and especially to our friends in the music business and to our wonderful friends here and all of you out there. This is not goodbye, it's just good night, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
On November 23rd, 1959, Alan Freed gave his last broadcast from WABC New York. 5 years later, at the age of 43, he was dead as a result of alcoholism. To the horror of his adversaries, both rock and roll and payola would live on. Bribes to DJs may have died down briefly in the early 60s, but again, the moment payola is banned is precisely when you get the most bang for your buck. Payola crept back in slowly, and after a decade was ready to strike the headlines once again. This time it was a 1974 report from CBS News.
But now the charge is made that CBS Records, one of the largest producers in the industry, was engaged in payola on a grand scale. A former CBS Records executive told federal investigators that CBS Records had spent $500,000 for payola over a 2-year period.
Although no specific albums were mentioned in this report, CBS Records had, in the last year, released albums from Fleetwood Mac, Herbie Hancock, Chicago, and Aretha Franklin, among many others.
And a lot of that was done not in the old-fashioned way, where you wrote out $100 and gave it to the dude. No, it's mostly getting on the currying favor, getting on the good side through drugs.
Do you know for a fact that narcotics were given as a gift?
Yes, in some cases. I know some of the jocks that are how shall we say it, narcotics users.
Much in the way that payola coverage in 1959 could barely contain its disdain for rock and roll, coverage in the 70s was all too eager to link payola to the underground drug culture, as well as the excesses of wealthy rock stars.
In their 20s, they are rich, powerful, temperamental, and pampered. They are the Led Zeppelin, a rock group on tour.
I'm a bit upset that there's not a pool table on board, but apart from that, I think this is about the best way to travel.
While some of this is laughable in retrospect, payola did have its ugly side. In 1977, a DC-based concert promoter testified that when he booked Earth, Wind & Fire, local DJs threatened to remove their songs from rotation unless they were paid a $14,000 bribe. Later, when he booked Aretha Franklin and the Isley Brothers, the same DJs demanded a cut of the box office. Similar stories emerged from Al Green, the Commodores, and Average White Band, the latter two dealing with crooked DJs in Norfolk, Virginia. It doesn't appear like this was a particularly widespread practice, but it's a reminder that payola could get pretty nasty. Speaking of which,
according to figures provided to NBC News by industry sources, record companies pay independent promoters, many with mafia connections, almost $80 million a year. $80 million. And with this has come a climate of fear in the rock music business.
By the 1980s, the music industry was in a particularly dark place. Virtually every major label was knee-deep in payola, but this time through a proxy. They hired independent promoters to do the dirty work, so their own books were clean.
By industry estimates, Discipio on the East Coast is sometimes paid as much as $150,000 by a record company for handling just one record.
A network of independent promoters carved up the territory, so if you wanted to promote a record in a particular city, they were the only ones who could do it. The promoters used muscle to keep competition out, and to keep whistleblowers quiet.
It basically came out that I could have my face rearranged.
Years later, a grand jury investigation into one of these men, Joe Isgro, revealed his methods. Envelopes of cash were sent to radio program directors, between $3,000 and $5,000 per week. In addition, he had a subcontractor provide cocaine and women when such gifts were more appropriate.
You take this ounce and going home of cocaine. You know, we can get more, you take this, and I'll give you a call Tuesday.
And what happens Tuesday?
They call you and go, how was that? By the way, I got this record I want you to hear.
3 days after this interview aired, the man shown here, Miami DJ Don Cox, disappeared. Rumors swirled that he was murdered by the Gambino family. After 5 days, however, he called the station from an undisclosed hospital room. As the story went, he was leaving the radio station when 3 men blocked his car, one of them striking his face with a gun. The men then brought him to a parking lot where he was beaten severely. No police report was filed, and Don Cox refused to cooperate with authorities, so the story remains unverified. During ensuing interviews and investigations, the number of artists who were revealed to have been promoted by these gentlemen was pretty huge. Among them, Mick Jagger, Robert Plant, and Paul McCartney. Granted, it's not clear how much they knew what was going on, if at all. In an interview with Billboard magazine, manager Don McGee admitted that independent promoters, and therefore payola, played a big part in breaking Bon Jovi. He also said that Mötley Crüe's Smokin' in the Boys' Room became a top 10 hit without any of their help. Good for them. And as for the men behind the drama, after lengthy trials and investigations, none were ever convicted on payola charges. Nor were any of the record labels, who swore they would now keep their noses clean. For a while, they probably did. But as always, payola finds a way back in. While it would be some time before a scandal would grip the headlines once again, that doesn't mean it wasn't happening. A minor controversy in 1997 saw Interscope Records pay to get Limp Bizkit's first single on a Portland radio station. An announcement was actually made before each play, revealing it to be a paid sponsorship, thus making it perfectly legal. It still brought the band some heat, though. That would be small potatoes compared to what was brewing in the office of Eliot Spitzer, then Attorney General of New York. In 2004, he subpoenaed the 4 major record labels, gaining access to emails which revealed the continuation of payola and all its dirty glory.
What do I have to do to get Audioslave on WKSS this week?
Won't have to deal with enough that Hot 97 around Finesse and Exhibit Records.
Looking for a laptop for promotion on Bowow.
You have room for a money record this week? 311 Lovesong Big $.
One email from an executive at Sony's Epic Records revealed they paid $4,000 to get Franz Ferdinand on a Buffalo radio station. Plus another $750 each for Gretchen Wilson and Good Charlotte. If a radio station wasn't willing to play ball, no problem. The label would hire people to call in, requesting a particular track, so the station would be tricked into thinking it's a popular song. In one email, the employee complains that the girls they've hired to call in are not excited enough. They need to be going out, or getting drunk, or getting in the hot tub, or going clubbing, he says. And to be clear, it wasn't just Sony Records. All of the major labels were doing this, and each would settle with the state of New York to the tune of millions of dollars. The list of artists implicated through emails and other reports is astonishing. Of course, this doesn't mean they knew what was going on, or that their actions were necessarily illegal. So, what about today? We've grown as a culture, have we not? Technology has democratized the music business so that anybody with an iPad can make a hit. They just need an internet connection to share it with the world. Has payola finally been defeated? Not at all. If anything, the explosion of social media has just created more opportunities to manipulate the appearance of success. Instead of fake call-ins to radio stations, it's fake Reddit upvotes purchased with cryptocurrency. Instagram likes, Spotify plays, Twitter followers, even Facebook event responses. All of these can be purchased. Add in some carefully edited concert videos, and you can pull a threaten. Spoof your way into a 10-day European tour. But how about classic payola? The bribing of gatekeepers like DJs to shill your tunes. Does this still exist in the streaming age? The answer again is, well, yeah. A 2015 article from Billboard revealed that Universal Music Group was hiring a new marketing executive known to pay for placements on streaming platforms. They quote an unnamed source who revealed that labels pay anywhere from $2,000 to $10,000 to get a track added to a popular Spotify playlist. A few years later, an article in Daily Dot confirmed these figures. A well-known music promoter stated that he would pay anywhere from hundreds to $2,000 to get added to a user-created playlist. And this is all not to mention radio payola, which, unsurprisingly, still goes on. In 2020, text messages leaked to Rolling Stone revealed what appeared to be consistent payola by a well-known independent promoter. Working on behalf of many different record labels, the promoter would dictate to radio stations when he wanted more spins for a particular artist, as well as when he wanted others to go down. For example, at the start of the pandemic, Green Day's frontman released a tongue-in-cheek cover of I Think We're Alone Now, which ended up being a surprise hit.
Doesn't seem to be anyone around.
However, a text from May 2020 went, "I hate to do this, but Billie Joe needs to go down." The record label, he explained, stopped paying him to promote it. If we take down, let's see if they are all of a sudden working it. Or in August 2019, when he told a station to, quote, kill Panic at the Disco and Ed Sheeran in favor of a song he was pushing by Shawn Mendes. That week, the song did in fact rise above the competition and reach #1 on the media-based radio chart. Okay, so you get the point. It's safe to say that payola has had a consistent presence for some 150 years. It helped promote the first multi-platinum single. It was essential to the birth of rock and roll. And regardless of your age, it was probably used by at least some of your favorite childhood bands. That said, we still haven't answered an important question. Does it matter? Over the years, influential people have weighed in, and they tend to fall under three camps. On the one hand, there are those like Ralph Gleason who see payola's role as minimal.
I'm saying that we know, regardless of payola, that you can only get a hit if it's in the grooves. You can't buy a hit. What you can do is you can bribe people, apparently, to play your records, and sometimes, if it's a marginal record, that will get a little more mileage out of it than you might have gotten before.
On a personal level, most of us would probably agree. Even if payola was used to get, say, Fleetwood Mac on the radio, purely hypothetical, your love of their music is real. You're not some sheeple that likes everything you're told to. In fact, since you're watching this channel, you probably like some pretty cool obscure bands too. That said, obscure music is exactly that. Obscure. If hit songs truly are in the grooves, then why do all singles on the Billboard 100 just happen to come from the same three record labels? Why, during the explosion of home recording and weird internet subgenres, has radio music become even more repetitive? Well, those in the other camp will say it's because payola is stifling creativity. Every once in a blue moon, a song will be so powerful that it can't not be played. But this is so rare as to be almost non-existent. The reality is, the songs you hear on big time radio all got there the same way. And just as you might be starting to grasp which camp you stand with, there's a third one that complicates things even further. These people agree that payola is a destructive force, but don't think that banning it is the best solution either. If individual people could bid on radio station plays, or placement on one of Spotify's coveted playlists, it would force the major labels to cede some of their control. It is in the collective interest of major record companies to outlaw payola. If artists can't buy their way onto the air, they are dependent on the major companies and their connections. Sure enough, there has been a surge of legal payola options in recent years. Websites like SubmitHub or MusoSoup, where small payments are made to get your music reviewed by gatekeepers. Plus, Spotify has been testing their own pay-to-play system called Discovery Mode. Granted, this feature is controversial, to say the least. I'm not here to make a judgment call on which of these three camps is right. I would rather you all argue that in the comments below. But I do think I can sum things up with this. We like that there are some gatekeepers out there, separating our musical libraries from the ocean of garbage that is the internet. At the same time, we want independent artists to have a fair shot, so that future Chuck Berrys and Brian Enos don't just float in obscurity. The question is, how should we balance these two competing desires, and whether or not payola could or should play any part? Is the idea of our favorite bands paying to be famous truly disgusting? Or is it maybe not so bad? I leave it to you.